Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gothy Roundtable, the official talk show of r/goth. I'm Cadaver Kelly, and as always, I'm joined by my awesome co-hosts Dave and DJ Carnivorous. Hi, Dave.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Caroline.
Hey.
This month, our topic is Deathrock, a topic that our two guests are intimately familiar with. They are both Florida-based DJs, part of Obscura Undead, and Deathrock enthusiasts. Azy and Malek, welcome to the round table.
Thank you for having us.
You should probably get some canned applause for this part of your talk shows.
Yeah, we need those old sitcom tracks to add in.
Yeah.
So, Azy and Malek, tell our viewers about DJing in the Florida scene, Obscura Undead, and any other projects you'd like to mention.
Well, I'd like to say that started DJing in Florida a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years. I started with Obscura Undead. Now I'm more independent and stuff, but it has been great being integrated in the scene here, and knowing a whole bunch of wonderful people and all of that. It's been really good. After the pandemic, I started doing Twitch as well. So I'm there Wednesdays and Sundays. Basically 9, 8. It depends on what time. I usually announce it on my page and stuff. But Eastern Standard Time. So basically, and it's been good.
Great. And Azy.
Yeah, Kelly, you mentioned Obscura Undead. That's basically it's Florida based, but it's just a collective of DJs. We got folks all over the country who write, DJ, record things, all of that jazz. And in Florida, it pretty much just started as a way to get more ears on the music that wasn't being represented in the club so much. We haven't had an in-person event in a couple of months, mostly because securing venue space has been kind of wonky because everything is so up and down usually. But I don't know. We got a pretty cool team. Deathrock is just a small part of what we do, but it's one of my specialities and one of Malek's specialities because, we each have genre focuses. And what was really cool is before the pandemic, I was starting to incorporate a half hour or 15 minutes at the end of the night to Deathrock. And at first people were really confused and I'd maybe get Malek dancing, and that's kind of about it. But eventually as it went on, people actually started requesting Deathrock and wanting to hear that going out and kind of expecting that and looking forward to the last half hour or so. It might not be the most popular of, genres under the goth umbrella right now, but, still going strong, which is part of the reason why I think we're probably going to end up talking about Deathrock Revival later this afternoon.
Deathrock Revival. I know how artists and just people in the scene in general feel about the Revival moniker. It's a little bit of a misnomer usually.
Yeah, just a touch. It implies something died.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's always been dead.
Undead.
But yeah, Deathrock, really awesome subgenre within the goth dark alternative umbrella. And as you mentioned, Obscura Undead covers a large variety of dark underground music, with Deathrock just being one of them. But I thought that you and Malek were two perfect guests to bring on to talk about Deathrock because that is a genre that's close to both of your hearts. And you both specialize in a lot of Deathrock as DJs and as contributors to Obscura Undead. So I thought we could start out here by giving the viewers a little bit of background history on Deathrock, a little bit of Deathrock one-on-one, because we do have viewers of all different experience levels in the scene. So Deathrock 101 for our viewers. Deathrock is the genre of goth music that is probably closest to its punk roots. Sometimes Deathrock is even called dark punk. It started in LA in the early 80s and was the earliest iteration of music falling under that goth umbrella to come out of the United States. If anyone wants to learn more about Deathrock in LA during that time, I would recommend this book, Phantoms by Mikey Bean. There's a lot of great accounts that came from band interviews. It's a dense read. It's a little bit all over the place, but it's definitely worth it. Cool stuff in there. Caroline, I know you read that book. How was your experience with it?
It took me 3 months.
So yeah, not a light read.
It's not, definitely. Like there's 2 columns on each page, and each page is like A4 size, and it's like interview style, so it's really hard to read. Like in like one chapter in one sitting was tedious, but like it's a good book. It's just really hard to get through, but that happens with a lot of like nonfiction books. You can probably show an example of what the pages look like. It also has a lot of really cool.
Put some kind of like prose context in there instead of just saying here.
Yeah. It looks like a phone book, like.
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah. But it does have a lot of cool pictures of flyers and artwork. Yeah.
I'm trying to show it where the light doesn't glare on it. But that book is called Phantoms by Mikey Bean. So information for that book for anyone who's watching this back on my YouTube channel, that book, Obscura Undead, Azy Malek's Twitch channels, all of the stuff we mentioned here. I'm going to link all of that in the description. So kind of keeping on that like background Deathrock 101. Azy, any other like information or context that you want to add from that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually when we talk about Deathrock coming out of the LA scene, we think of 2 primary bands, and that's 45 Grave and Christian Death, which kind of laid the foundation for Deathrock in LA. And it's not so surprising that Deathrock is most closely related to punk because it came out of the punk hardcore scene. I mean, 45 Grave is also credited for being one of the foundational bands for horror punk and psychobilly as well, with, like their emphasis on, like kitschy B horror films and all of that stuff. But I know that now in retrospect, we lump a lot of Deathrock together with Batcave, which developed independently of LA Deathrock, because Batcave came more as a reaction to punk out of post-punk and with glam, with those kind of influences. And it wasn't until about the mid-'80s when there was starting to be crossover between LA Deathrock and UK Batcave, because I think Christian Death was touring with Alien Sex Fiend and Sex Gang Children on a European tour, and that's when we started seeing sort of the blending of this Batcave and Deathrock. That was around, I think, like 1983-ish. So, and that was also around the time when Deathrock started spreading specifically to France and Japan, which are also 2 big epicenters for Deathrock. Especially Japan. Japanese Deathrock is really interesting. It's really good.
Back in the 80s, one of the bands that I definitely wanted to mention from that era was Fadia. So they were a Japanese death rock band in the 80s. And it's very hard to find Fadia music, actually. You can find stuff on YouTube. Once in a rare while, you might be able to snag up some physical media. I have not been able to, as far as like Fadia
they are music highly collectible.
Yeah. And you had mentioned Christian Death and 45 Grave. So Malek, I also want to get your take on kind of like the early Deathrock in the early 80s, mid 80s. Any additional context or comments you wanted to give the viewers about Deathrock in that time?
Well, I think Bones and Roses is one of those bands that rarely gets mentioned. I like some of the albums from Kitchen in the Plastic Spoons.
Oh yeah, love Kitchen in the Plastic Spoons.
Yeah, Dead Cold was also very, very influential with the sound. One of my inspirations personally would be, although they're more like post-punk, but will be Virgin Prunes because of their in the way of inventing around, how do you say that, like coming up with interesting sounds, basically. That's
very very innovative.
Really enjoy. Yeah, but then you have so many other bands in the more contemporary.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about modern death rock a little later in the episode here because the genre just has evolved so much over the years and has gone through so many iterations. As far as like some other like classic 80s death rock artists that I would recommend, there's Alter Defay, Ex Voto,
Screaming for Tina.
Yeah, and
Bone
Community FK, Rudimentary Peni.
Bone Orchid, yes. That's very good.
Oh, yes. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Old favorite of mine.
Yeah.
So, Dave, any other classic death rock bands from your library that we might have missed from the early days?
I'm a basic son of a gun, so...
Yeah, same. Already mentioned.
We have 13 Sky we mentioned.
Is one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, and Malek, go ahead. Were there other like classic 80s death rock artists that we might have missed?
13 Sky, I think 13 Moon. Also,
going back to the 80s.
The 80s, yes.
The 2000s.
In the 80s, well, we have the experimental post-punk of Madame Eduarda in Japan, and I think it captures a lot of the death rock guitars that we have nowadays, at least back then. And although they are post-punk band, they experimented a lot with the sound, and especially in the guitar. So I think that's very
well. I think one band that should be mentioned is The Naked and the Dead, which represents sort of a New York branch of death rock that was kind of going on around the same time period.
Yeah, they happen to take the name from Andy song, right?
It's a 1958 horror movie too, but
yeah.
Very cool. I think that's an interesting point about the relationship between early death rock and early post-punk, and how there was a lot of experimentation. I mean, all of this music was experimental for the time. So there was, after a few years, starting to be a lot of like crossover and innovation. Azy, you had mentioned that the post-punk movement was kind of over in UK and Europe, and that after a few years into the 80s, there was some of that crossover to the point where some of those UK and European bands from the early days will often be brought up in discussions about death rock, like Alien Sex Fiend or Sex Gang Children. Those are two bands that are often kind of lumped into death rock discussions because their sounds did kind of take some of that influence and direction in the 80s. There's definitely a lot of Sex Gang Children music that sounds like death rock, some of these early death rock bands from LA. So it was a genre that did pretty quickly go global. So even though it had started in LA, I think that it was pretty far reaching in the early days in the 80s. And yeah, it's very cool that there was like a death rock movement in Japan. It just kind of goes to show how prolific the genre is.
Yep. And what's really interesting about that time period is, that people weren't listening to these, LPs and stuff. In a lot of cases, it was a lot of people just hearing like, hey, this sounds like this, and it's really cool, and people kind of imagining what that might sound like. I have a book published in the early 80s, back when all of this sort of new music that was coming out didn't have a genre name other than everything was lumped in under new wave. And there's specifically a review of Christian Death's first album in there. And in the review, it talks about how the guy had to borrow a copy from a friend of his because it was the only one that he could find. And the whole review consisted of trashing the album and being like, but I guess some people over in California like it.
Ouch.
Damn.
It was a really bad review.
I think you sent it to me, right?
Yeah, I did.
You sent me a photo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, and a lot of that early death rock did influence, or like the bands of the time weren't just kind of touching on the goth scene; they were touching on the punk scene, and as you mentioned, like Psychobilly with that like mid-century influence. To the extent that there's that Pitchfork video, A Brief History of Goth, which I think I'm most known for reacting to that video on YouTube. But they mentioned in that video, they called Deathrock, I think, a gothed up rockabilly revival. And that's not accurate because not all Deathrock has like mid-century or rockabilly influence, but some of the early artists did have that influence in there. 45 Grave certainly did.
Yeah, even with 45 Grave, they went from some more hardcore sounds to incorporating like surf rock to incorporating like more rockabilly sounds. Like they were just screwing around, having fun.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that kind of stuff too. I love like the mid-century, like surf rock, rockabilly, and death rock. Some of that early death rock is a great kind of juxtaposition of all of those things of the dark goth sounds, punk, mid-century with surf rock and rockabilly. And that's one of my favorite things about death rock is that it combines so many of those different elements together. And 45 Grave's a great example of that. Go ahead, Malik.
No, I was gonna say that that's one of the things that I enjoy the most in when listening to death rock, because it sounds really fun, to hear all the different elements that goes into the music. Another band that was very influential, I guess, to all of us in the band, the playlist, was Ausgang from the 80s. It was really influential as well. So I guess it's worth to mention.
Great. So we've talked a little bit about death rock's roots and death rock in the 80s, but I don't think you can have a true discussion about death rock without talking about death rock in Latin America, because it's so prolific in Mexico, in Brazil, like all across Latin America. Death rock really has its place in those dark underground alternative scenes. Was wondering if you two had recommendations for Latin American death rock bands, or even just Spanish language death rock bands. Malik, I know that Spanish is a first language for you, so I'm sure that's something that's played into your love of death rock, and with so many great Spanish language death rock bands, I'm sure you have some good recommendations for our viewers.
It's been long argue about ejaculation post-mortem, what they really are, but they were very influential um, for me to a certain degree when I was much younger. Um, but yeah, they have that experimental sound and very weird. I don't know how to describe it. How would you describe Azy?
It's kind of
Ejaculation
reminiscent. It's kind of reminiscent of alien sex fiends, like more sort of industrial incorporations, I think.
Yeah.
Because they do a lot of very odd things. Then they do a lot of experimentation with synths and just random fucking machine noises.
That's very cool.
Yeah, you have more contemporary Micro Kiev. You have
Micro Kiev. Onde Desaparecidos. I love that band.
Voz de tus ausentes. Desaparecidos, yeah. 11 desaparecidos.
Mm-hmm.
La voz de tus ausentes. You have Acid Bats.
Los Carniceros.
Los Carniceros, of course. Los Carniceros del Norte.
And they're from Spain, but they are Spanish language, so they're very
yes.
I'm sure accessible within the Latin American goth scene as a Spanish language band.
I mean,
and that's a great example of a band that does have some of that like mid-century surf rock, rockabilly influences in it as well.
Yeah, well, they came very heavily out of the punk scene, but it's really I think misleading to try to separate a lot of what's going on in the New World from what's going on like in Spain. Simply because the way that goth spread to Latin America is because a German label was trying to figure out a way to sell all of these weird post-punky experimental art bands that sang in Spanish. So they were trying to figure out how to sell these CDs. So they said, well, you know what? We should just market it over in Central and South America and Mexico. So it got there pretty early, too, in the early 80s. So a lot of people don't really realize this, but the goth scene and the Deathrock scene that kind of developed in Latin America happened happened contemporary to as it was developing, like in these hotspots that we think of in LA, in the UK, and in Germany. But a lot of people don't really like recognize the history of La Movida and like Parálisis Permanente.
Yeah, that is important context and background, and that I think that does put into perspective the relationship of now we do have these like hotspots in Central and South America.
Yeah, on bands you also have Zombies Sexuales. Zombies Sexuales, that was another band, but that's from Argentina, but not that one. Naughty Zombies. Naughty Zombies is the band that Hugo from Los Carniceros del Norte started when he was like 16 years old. Then he did Los Carniceros, and now he's then come Silence, which I think a lot of people have heard of. What else?
How long has Air been around?
90s.
Okay.
Yeah. 90s, yeah. More or less. Gorgonas, very influential Deathrock band from Mexico.
Malek, I know the first time I met you, one band that we bonded over was Cruz de Navaja.
Oh,
yeah, and I know. I'm such a yinzer. I cannot like pronounce anything.
Also, the clip that you have that you posted of Malek saying that. Cruz de Navajas.
Yeah.
Cruz de Navajas.
Oh, crap.
as long as you can find the music and listen to it, it's good. If you can't even pronounce the name, I mean, it happens to me all the time. I don't even know how to pronounce. I remember when I tried to pronounce horror vacui for the first time. It was like, you know, it's really hard sometimes.
Yeah, for me, I listen to music across so many different like languages, and I can properly pronounce none of them. But all really great artists. I try. Yeah, the first time I met Malek, we were talking about Crusta Navajas, and you had given me a lesson on how to pronounce it, so I appreciate it. I appreciate the education. One more recent Latin American Deathrock band that I wanted to mention is Skeletal Bats. I think they're from Mexico City. So they're cool. They're a modern Deathrock band, and I think they incorporate some synth into their music, which we're seeing a lot of, and we'll probably talk more about that once we get to the modern Deathrock portion of our discussion.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of important to recognize too that like what sets early Deathrock apart, like as it was developing from psychobilly and horror punk, was the incorporation of keyboards. It's just now we're kind of seeing it taken to like its logical conclusion. Well, not even conclusion, like logical progression of just more and more incorporation.
Yeah, and we kind of talk about that when we talk about the innovation of modern goth genres in general, that a lot of these different kind of subgenres or styles of music are incorporating into one another and blending those sounds to create something entirely new. So of course, Deathrock is, in my opinion, Deathrock is probably the genre of within that like goth dark alternative umbrella that I'm seeing the most experimentation and innovation with. There's tons of it happening with like post-punk and dark wave. But Deathrock, I'm seeing some really interesting innovation. There's so much variety in the sounds.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I like the most about Deathrock in general, that it gives you room for experimentation and to be creative and do your own thing, basically.
Yeah, I've ranted about this at Malek many times. Because that's a big frustration. Is it feels that like other genres kind of stay very static underneath the goth umbrella, but Deathrock there's always something like weird and new going on.
Yeah. And I think some artists might have some or be hesitant to do too much experimentation if they are trying to package themselves within the goth scene, because they're worried about straying too much from what is or isn't goth, which it's unfortunate. I understand like wanting to kind of keep the traditions going and protect the or keep those genres alive. But also it's a fine balance between that and allowing artists free reign to have that creative expression and experimentation. So Deathrock is one of those genres where I think there is a lot of good innovation happening and a lot of creative outside of the box type of thinking.
Yeah, I think it always has been like that. I think that when I first started, usually it pushed you to be distinct or different, to break from the norm, and that is one of the most incredible things about the music genre itself. I really like that.
It's more playful than goth rock.
Yes.
I mean, look at 45 Graves' first single, riboflavin flavored, non-carbonated, polyunsaturated blood.
Yeah. And that one, that's actually a cover song, but you know, they were very much kind of taking like that like silly B horror, very almost like theatrical approach. And Deathrock, I would say Deathrock is probably the most theatrical of the goth genres, which is saying something because goth is very dramatic in general, but Deathrock has a very theatrical approach.
I think the reason for that is because Gothrock doesn't have to lean as much on theatricality because the music is a bit more complex, but Deathrock is like simple chords, simple drums, simple melody. Force of personality in Deathrock more often than not has to come through you know, lyricism and the front person.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that about Deathrock. It's fun. It's you know, it takes itself less seriously than some other genres of alternative and underground music, and that kind of lighthearted approach I think is part of what opens up the door for more of that like creative expression or experimentation, or it allows artists to feel more comfortable in doing that.
Yeah, I agree.
So we talked a little bit about Deathrock in the 80s, you know, Latin American Deathrock. Can't have a discussion on Deathrock without talking about the 2000s. So, and we touched on this at the beginning of the discussion here, but the 2000s are sometimes referred to as the Deathrock revival. Of course, we know revival is kind of a misnomer because you know, the scene and the music, it's always been around. But I think the reason or kind of the source of that, like that era being dubbed the revival era is because it was specifically in the LA scene, the birthplace of Deathrock, being revived in the live music venues. And Phantoms, the book Phantoms touches on this a little bit, but there was a period of time in the 90s where Deathrock wasn't really present in the LA punk scene. And, you know, a lot of that has to do with some of the earlier artists either dying or not playing music anymore or moving on to other things. So there was like a slow period in LA for Deathrock. And then in the late 90s and into the 2000s, that started picking back up again. And in recent years, or the 2010s, have kind of been dubbed the post-punk revival era, because that seems to be, or post-punk seemed to take center stage. But in the 2000s, Deathrock was kind of at the forefront of all like goth alternative conversations. And so 2000s, favorite 2000s era Deathrock bands, or your thoughts on the 2000s era for Deathrock in general. Azy, I'll start with you.
I think some of my favorite Deathrock from the revival period all came out of France. So Castrati and oh my god, Malek, is that Violet Silhouette, the band that you had the big back patch for?
Violet Silhouette?
Yeah.
No, the big patch is oh my god.
Violet Stigmata.
Violet Stigmata.
Violet Stigmata. Thank you. I knew I was getting that wrong. Violet Stigmata. Because out of France at the in the Deathrock revival period, you get this really weird waltzy carnival sound. And I'm not really sure why, but it puts me in mind of a spooky Marseille. I love it.
Yeah, it is. And you sometimes have said carnival Deathrock, and it's funny that everyone knows exactly what you're talking about when you say that. And it kind of it ties back into what we were saying about that playfulness and the theatrics.
Mm-hmm. I would love to look into it more to see if it might in any way, shape, or form be related to the horror films that happened to be popular at the time. Because in a lot of Latin American Deathrock, you find a lot of themes that pull from a lot of Spanish horror films. 45 Grave pulled a lot from Italian horror films, and there are some other death rock bands that do as well, but I wonder if there's a connection between that weird sound and maybe the soundtracking of like shitty French horror films. That would be something to look into.
Yeah.
I laugh because that's one of the things that I enjoy the most.
Yeah.
Out of the sound, that's one of the things that I enjoy the most. I think is the most fun to play around with. For the bands that I enjoy the most in the 2000 would be La Peste Negra from Spain. They are the same people who now do or have the band name Maleficio. I think people have heard of them. It's the same vocalist, Eva, which is lovely person, very nice. Hi, if you're watching. I like Cinema Strange, of course. Scarlet Remains. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Those were two of the big ones at the time. Cinema Strange, Scarlet Remains. Cinema Strange kind of has that carnival death rock feel to it.
Yeah, now they do cabaret music with like the one guy for Dead Fly Ensemble.
Miguel and the Living Dead. Very, very cool. Sleeping Children. You have Dead Shopsky.
Ooh, yeah, Dead Chowsky, another one of the French bands.
Yeah. I mentioned it because you like them a lot. So.
I do.
I was the only one. Remember that time when we went to Miami? I was the only one dancing to that song.
Yeah. Cut the flash wires.
The dance floor was empty. I was dancing to that song. Anyway, that happens sometimes. What else?
Malik, I know you're a Bloody Dead and Sexy fan.
Oh yeah. Big time. And they're coming up with a new album. Hopefully, let's see. But yes,
yeah, they were big in the 2000s.
So many bands.
So we had mentioned Los Carniceros del Norte, which was that era, or they were kind of, I think of them as a 2000s band. Obviously that's when they like really started putting out albums. And as you mentioned, Tragic Black.
Yes.
There is Christ versus Warhol. Which Christ versus Warhol was, I think, late 2000s.
And Christ versus Warhol, that was still Eve Ghost singing, right, from Scarlet's Remains?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was the Cemetery Girls, which they kind of, I don't know, it depends on if you consider Cemetery Girls to be death rock, goth rock. They kind of like cross over some sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and then Deadborn Babies.
Deadborn Babies. You have also Frank. Oh my God, Elvira and
the Bats.
The Bats. Yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the Frankenstein. and they have a song named that. And, never mind.
I know ITAC said that during that period, it really went international, but I don't know. Death rock, I think, was already pretty goddamn international. 13th Moon from Japan was also during the revival period. I think that they put their first material out in 2006. Yes. Zorch Records did a compilation of a bunch of like gothy, death rocky Japanese music that I think is available for free download because their entire webpage is defunct except for a bunch of download links.
Frank the Baptist was doing some weird elements of pretty much everything in the 2000s as well.
One thing I think is really strange about the revival, though, is that a lot of bands that went to, like, a lot of high profile bands that went on to make music later, rather than, say, doing things that were more punk, for some reason they started doing things that were more metal. So you kind of started getting some more metal-y guitars in some of the later death rock that I think people started then disavowing, because they're just like, well, this is like just metal guitars instead of like the really trashy like punk guitars.
But I remember back look, in the beginning, you know, a lot of people used to label some bands death rock in the, you know, the guitars were.
Yeah, Bandcamp, a lot of bands that are just putting out doom metal are labeling it death rock, but there are 3 different distinct genres then that have been called death rock, and the only one I accept is the one that, you know, came out of 45 Grave, not, you know, the Screaming Jay Hawkins death rock, which is same name, unrelated genre, and the metal death rock, same name, unrelated genre.
Well, there's death metal, and I think that sometimes people can conflate those two, death rock versus death metal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say that that's what happened. So we don't get
There's only
names.
so many cool genre names you can come up with and like stick together. So
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, true.
But we know what we're talking about when we say death rock, and that's what matters. And I the 2000s era, it's interesting we're talking about that because all 5 of us are millennials. So the 2000s are were probably impactful on all of us because of the age that we were at that time. For me, this was kind of like the coming of age period where I was really starting to discover and get into alternative genres in general. So I think that has really shaped my taste in music and my experience in the goth scene, having come up in that time where it was the death rock revival. Everything was very heavily like it was kind of like death rock, psychobilly, goth rock. Like those were kind of the big ones in kind of dark alternative music that I, as a teenager with access to the internet, could find a lot of.
Mm-hmm. First time I heard Christian Death, I hated them. I did not like the sound, and then eventually, as I started exploring death rock more passively, like there were other bands that came out that had sort of more of like the psychobilly sound or rockabilly sound, which was something I already enjoyed. But what made it took me longer to get into death rock than I really would have preferred, even though like now it's kind of my favorite genre, is because death rock, due to its weirdness, is a bit more inaccessible than sort of the more pop convention friendly goth rock and electronic music we have.
Yeah.
So it was an acquired taste for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think that's true of a lot of like experimental music that if you don't have the right introduction or gateway in, it might take you a long time to come around to certain like genres or styles or groups of music. And I could definitely see death rock being one of those ones where because there is so much variety, as we mentioned, that if you aren't starting in the right place that kind of aligns with your taste, it's weird. It's a weird genre in the best way possible. But, that could be, as you mentioned, Azy, maybe less accessible than other types of music, especially some of the more like dark wave and genres like that are more kind of aligned with new wave and popular 80s music. That stuff is very accessible. But death rock is much more unique and much more, it's more niche, and that's probably a big reason why it's more niche and has an even more niche following than some of these other niche genres that we talk about in the goth scene.
Mm-hmm. I think it might be beat only by No Wave, though.
Yeah, No Wave is very niche. One 2000s bands that I wanted to mention as well. This one was actually something I discovered. This was a discovery of mine in recent years. So probably like 5 years ago or so, I had a coworker who used to be like a goth DJ and a music journalist and stuff, who sent me like a master list of recommendations for all these different bands, and some of them were pretty niche. And one was a death rock band from the 2000s, I think like later 2000s. They were called Turn Pale, and they're from Bloomington, Indiana. So they were a little more, I think they were probably more in the punk scene than the goth scene, but the sound of their music is very much like that kind of death rock guitar sound. And it had like, the music itself is sonically very death rock, but it's kind of packaged in more of a punk package with that band. But that's definitely one I wanted to mention. Caroline, Dave, any 2000s death rock bands from your collections that we might have skipped over?
I don't think so. I wasn't really like super into the 2000s stuff. Like I think I'm the youngest here, so I like got into goth like on the very like last of that. So like, yeah, I guess it was into like Bloody Dead and Sexy. I don't know, but yeah, like not a lot.
Yeah, I've never been the biggest death rock fan. I know, crucify me.
No, but same. Like
that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think there's a band that hasn't been mentioned that I actually enjoy, so to speak. Or is that the correct way of saying it?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny you said crucify me, because I was about to say that's very death rock of you to say, though, Dave.
Okay, so there was this band Cemetery, which was in the 2000s as well. Oh my god, I wrote it down because I was Cemetery and Azy, help me.
Cemetery and
No, Cemetery, the band Cemetery.
Yeah, what
Not
about them?
to be confused with the Swedish metal band, the other one, the Californian one. That's what I mean.
Yeah, they have one of their albums is like yellow and stuff.
There was another band in the 2000s as well. Oh, I skipped the name. Forgive me.
It's all right. I forgot Violet Stigmata somehow and said Violet Silhouette, and I know that's not the same.
The Violet Silhouette is a contemporary band now. I think they're more.
Yeah, and also not death rock.
Yeah, no, not death rock at all. Well, I think they're more ethereal type of music.
And that happens a lot too, where I see death rock bands evolve their sound to be like completely away from the death rock sound. That's happened with a few bands, or I've seen more than one death rock band move more and more in the direction of dark wave. That's a trend that I've seen with and it's not like a lot of death rock bands, but there have been a few death rock bands that kind of have blended, and we talked about, like synths coming into death rock heavily, but like there are death rock artists that have like started to blend some of those sounds or even move more towards the dark wave end of things.
And talking like Vazoom.
I'm talking like Bastet, I think, had kind of like a death rock sound, and now is releasing stuff or has released recent singles that sound more like dark wave. There's
I think when talking about Bastet, though, like that's a whole nother conversation on like the Oakland music scene, because what they're doing is super special right now, I think.
Yeah, actually, I was going to mention that when we get to our modern portion. Believe me, I'm not going to skip the Oakland stuff.
I remember the two bands from that era. It was Scary Bitches and
oh yeah, Scary Bitches. How could we forget?
Strange Dolls Cult.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Finally.
Okay, I haven't heard those. I'm writing that down.
Oh yeah, it's really good.
I know I've talked to Azy specifically about Scary Bitches before, so shame on me for not mentioning Scary Bitches.
Right. Well, I mean, to be fair, they're in a class all their own.
Yeah, I was about to say that's like not like I don't think you could call them death rock or goth rock or industrial or whatever. They kind of had like a lot of stuff going on.
But they have that like kitschy, that like kitschy B horror thing going on that like you kind of find with like Bone Orchard too, though.
Yeah, very very death rock in spirit.
Yeah,
definitely.
Sometimes death rock, sometimes not. Experimentation is what they're up to.
All over the place.
I had two while we're still talking about the 2000s, I had two magazine recommendations for anyone who collects old like magazines or zines or anything. If you're looking on like eBay or sites like that to find old publications, two magazines from the 2000s that focused heavily on death rock. One was New Grave magazine. Another one was Drop Dead magazine. And I think both of those had like 5 or 6 issues. So if you're looking around for like magazines from the 2000s that focused on death rock, Drop Dead and New Grave are recommendations that I would have. Azy, any publications?
I would like to specifically recommend the magazine Deathrock from the revival period. I believe that was run by the guy who now runs postpunk.com.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
That one ran for I think 3 issues. But the pictures and features are fantastic in them.
I do not have Deathrock magazine in my collection. Now I'll have to go hunt down some issues.
Yeah, they're pretty easy to find.
So I think we can kind of get to the juicy portion of the conversation here. Modern death rock in the current era of death rock. Because even though we talked about like 2000s as the death rock revival era, I think some of the death rock right now is better than ever, or some of my absolute favorite death rock of all time has come out of the modern era or recent years. You know, we had mentioned Oakland. Nowadays, death rock is thriving and more innovative, or as thriving and innovative as ever here in the U.S. There is that fabulous dark punk movement coming out of the West Coast, and Oakland in particular has kind of an epicenter for that. Of course, there's other great death rock in other areas of the U.S. as well, and that scene seems to be saturated with a lot of like social and political themes, which is really cool because music is just such a great medium to deliver a message. Over in Europe, there's a lot of blending of death rock with elements of dark wave, as we've kind of like touched on a little bit. And Azy, I know you can go on and on about like modern death rock. So do you want to start by talking about like Oakland a bit?
Sure. Yeah, Oakland is just remarkably special. The whole music explosion there has been in the last couple of years, since I think 2016. I don't remember exactly when, but the explosion of music there has been so artistic, so collaborative, in a way that hasn't been seen for a while. A lot of folks who I've talked to about it, even though it's been difficult for them to talk about it, kind of attribute this to the ghost ship fire, which unfortunately, you know, it was a warehouse fire that led to the deaths of a lot of prominent people in the in various music scenes on the more indie side. And just so many musicians that, you know, might have never spoken with each other, interacted prior to this, started coming together as a result of this tragedy, and there was a lot of cross-pollination. So now we've seen some very creatively fertile acts coming out of Oakland, like Ötzi, Mystic Priestess, Bastet, the Davy Bones' band.
Oh, the Wraith.
The Wraith.
Or no, wait.
No,
That's Davy Bales.
Bales.
That's Davy Bales, and that's another one we should probably talk about. But and that's not Oakland. I think that's like LA.
No, Davy Bones. He has I'm spacing on his band name right now, and it's very, very good.
Some of the other Oakland bands, there's Ötzi, of course, False Figure, Cult Strange.
I'm getting some messages in chat here. The Ink Bats?
Yes, thank you. And yeah, also S's.
There's out of Ventura, California, there's Detoxy, of course, great death rock band. So that Oakland movement has been really cool to see. That I think some of those Oakland bands are probably the most like social and politically focused of like the current like modern music, which, like I said, you know, music's the like a great vehicle to deliver a message. So seeing that in the music is very cool. It's very much in line with the punk roots of death rock and goth in general.
Right. Well, there's actually something, I read something interesting recently, which was talking about how death rock kind of for a while became more apolitical as a result from crossover with the psychobilly scene, which are very apolitical. Which it's kind of hard to see that argument, I guess, given all of the social topics that like the LA bands came out and talked about. So I don't know how much truth there is to that. But definitely since the revival, especially with modern music, it has become so incredibly politicized. And I just love that if you want to go in for like looking for like radical bands or trans bands, you just start looking at death rock.
Oh yeah, there's this band that's maybe more like they kind of touch on death rock. They're kind of I would say gray area punk death rock, but they call themselves I think they list one of their genre tags as queer punk on Bandcamp, which is like, you know, I think that's a genre tag that multiple bands are using, the queer punk tag on Bandcamp, but they're called Lollygaggers, and they're literally clown themed, talking about like carnival death rock earlier. So that's a cool band.
Yeah.
We also have Pawns, the Horror Vacui, right? What is the Tower, the song you like? Oh,
The Nuts?
Yes. Yeah. So,
out of Brazil, I think.
There are also contemporary. I just wanted to say
that. There's this band out of Lakewood, California, and they have that Roz Williams Christian death sound called Shadow Roots. Their vocals sound very Roz. So if anyone's like a big Roz fan, that, you know, maybe they would or would not like that.
I wish that bands would move away from doing the Roz voice. It's kind of as cringe to me as when people try to be the sisters.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of that. But you know, sisters. Some people love those sisters copy bands, and you know, I'm sure lots of people love the Roz inspired bands as well. There is in LA, I did mention the Wraith. It's probably you know, pertinent to mention that Davy Bales from the Wraith did pass a few weeks ago. please go support the race, like Bandcamp. I know that there were some like funeral expenses and stuff related to Davy Bales' passing. And he had released, I think, I don't know if it was like 1 or 2 issues of a poetry zine, because we were talking about like kind of zine collections. And I think it's called Dead Flowers. I have 1 issue of that. Not sure if that's still up on their Bandcamp. But that's, you know, LA, not Oakland, still on that kind of like West Coast collection of death rock bands, though. And there's other great death rock from other parts of the U.S. as well. Down in Athens, Georgia, there's Tears for the Dying, great band. There's up in Boston, Massachusetts, Sisters of Shadow. And there was actually this this new debut release in 2021 that I really enjoyed called 149. So that band, the release and the band was called 149. They're based in New York.
Yeah, that's one of the members of it is the guy from Un Hombre Solo.
Very cool. I would highly recommend that release, and it's a self-titled debut release. So just look up 149 on Bandcamp. Malek, you had mentioned Horror Vacui, so that's they're in Italy.
Yes. You have arguably dystopian society and Pawns, I think I mentioned them. Yes.
What's that band that we like that's named after that flight that disappeared? 8173. Is that right?
Yes. Oh, I think I have it here.
There's a Russian band also by the name of Deathrock.
Oh yeah, Deathrock. Azy, I think we've talked about them before, and how
I think so.
How that name is so on the nose.
Yeah.
Good stuff though. I like what I've heard so far on their Bandcamp.
Did you find it? It's A5 something.
I didn't look it up. I was just asking you. I'm not looking it up.
No, I don't have it. I don't have it here. I have it in my hard drive.
I have it in my Bandcamp. I wish that they wouldn't do numbers. Don't name your band numbers. I can't remember a random string of numbers. I can't even remember my goddamn phone number.
We have Radio Scarlet. We had the what's this? Shrouds. More contemporary for sure.
Yeah, Yuka Solo. That was such a great release.
Bear with us a moment, folks. Technical difficulty. I feel like we need one of those cards that they have on TV when like the please stand by technical difficulties. Yes. Well, while we're figuring that out, someone did mention in the chat that the GoFundMe for Davy Bales' funeral expenses is still out there, and they're short a few thousand. So if anyone is interested in chipping in and helping out with those expenses, there's a GoFundMe, and I'll try to track down the link to that GoFundMe so I can put it in the description once this is up on YouTube. So while we're working through those audio issues, I'm going to go through some more death rock band recommendations. There's a death rock band out of Indonesia that's really good called Succubus. I would recommend that one. I Am the Shadow out of Portugal is another one. Soma 101 from Spain. Out of Poland, there's Psychoformalina. And Psychoformalina is another one of those bands that kind of experiments with a little more of those like dark wave elements. It is, I think, overall a death rock sound, but Psychoformalina has some dark wave influence in the music. So that seems to be a direction that I'm seeing more of the death rock bands in Europe taking some of that dark wave inspiration in there. We kind of mentioned some of the American death rock bands right now are more on the punk end, especially with that like Oakland, California movement going on right now. It's when I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that death rock is sometimes called dark punk. That movement in Oakland, California is the epitome of what I would call dark punk. Trying to see if there's any that I skipped over for my recommendations. Oh, 2 from Germany, out of Germany. Of course, I want to recommend Totenwald, and Gesture is another good one out of Germany. But when I was saying earlier that I'm noticing some death rock artists go in more of a dark wave direction, another one that I had in mind specifically was Carnal Machinery. It's the current project of Jacques Saff from Virgin and Veil. And you know, that's more in the dark wave direction, but you still hear that like death rock influence in it. It's in my opinion, when I listen to it, it sounds like a dark wave death rock blend. I think Jacques kind of markets it on Bandcamp, or you know, packages it on Bandcamp as dark wave, but you can hear that death rock influence in that sound.
Punk. He marketed as synth punk.
Synth punk. I like it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting blend of death rock and dark wave.
Yeah.
Let's see. Dave, Caroline, anything interesting come through the chat?
We have gotten a few questions for later that I could take now, I guess.
Any questions specifically for Malik in the chat?
If you want to get into a band that I recently got into is Death Church. Really good. I mean, I like it.
All right.
Death Church,
yes.
Check that out.
Yeah, if there's any questions, we can take. Sorry, I went back to the chat again.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions in the chat that they want us to field, feel free to drop those in there. I know Azy had mentioned that in earlier in the chat, ATAC said that the 2000s era was where, you know, the death rock revival really went international. And, you know, of course, we were talking about it was very international, even in the 80s, with expanding to France and Japan and all over. But what I think is interesting about that comment is ATAC is in Australia. So I'm wondering if maybe the 2000s was an era where death rock was starting to funnel its way into Australia more than before.
I guess so. I have no clue.
It's interesting to get these different perspectives from people in different regions around the world, because there's so much variance by location on others' experiences with the scene and how they've experienced not just death rock, but like all these different genres of music, especially like before modern social media. People really depended on their local scenes to find music and to shape their view into like dark alternative music in general. People relied heavily on their local DJs and what was being played at the clubs and what physical music that they had access to from CD shops, record stores. So it's good to get that like international perspective of what was available. And it's interesting to hear that where ATAC was in Australia, death rock became more heavily available in the 2000s. Makes sense.
Definitely.
And there was a question in chat regarding how do you classify Soda Stereo, Malek?
Soda Stereo?
Yep. If you've heard about them.
They are an alternative band, that's all. Spanish rock, if you will. That's what they are. Yeah. a lot of people think they're goth, and but no, they're just Spanish rock. That's what they are. Alternative for sure, yes. But so is Nirvana.
True.
You know. So
there was another one. How would you classify new skeletal faces?
They have a blend of metal and Deathrock. You can argue, yeah, for sure. I like their first album, yeah. On their second one, I got a little bit. It depends on the person who wants to listen to it. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I've seen it over the past few years. There is kind of a mix happening of different kinds of doom / death metal bands that's mixing in with like goth rock and death rock types of sounds. They're quite interesting in many cases.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of people are influenced by different genres of music, and that happened to Shadow. What's the name? Shadow Image. That band started another project which it's more death metal, and yeah, when Shadow Image started, it was more in the death rock, gothic rock side, and now they started another project, and it's more like death metal. I haven't listened to it, to be honest, because I don't listen to metal, but to each their own. I guess everyone can listen to whatever they want, you know. And that's good.
Azy, I think I saw something that wasn't spiking when you just said something there.
Can you hear me though?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yay! Okay, you are back. So I was kind of talking about or revisiting what I was saying earlier with like death rock artists going like more in a dark wave direction. So Jacques Saff from Virgin and Veil with Carnal Machinery is one of those examples. I saw your eyes light up when I mentioned Totenwald.
Totenwald is great. They use saxophone.
Yeah, Totenwald is a favorite of mine as well.
There are lots of like instrumental experimentation in death rock. Well, I mean, there always has been, but now more than ever, I'm seeing like a lot of innovation in like the different types of like instruments and effects that are coming into it, like instruments and effects that I haven't heard in death rock prior. So even though like keyboards and maybe even some synth was like present in death rock, like previous death rock, like some of the modern death rock, I'm seeing like more of a heavy synth presence than I've ever seen in death rock.
I think you can say that for most every genre right now, simply because it's way more accessible and you can do it from your bedroom without hundreds of dollars of equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
That is true, and I'm okay with that because I love me some synth. So,
I just read a question in the chat, but so you would like to talk about the Palest Gray? I don't know.
There's a question there about the Palest Gray.
No, the question was about Nox Novacula being death rock.
Oh, yeah, I'd classify them like more post-punk death rock instead of punk death rock, but you know, yeah, for sure, absolutely,
yeah.
Even some of their tracks you could almost call goth rock. It really depends on the track.
I listen to a lot of goth rock in them when I listen to them, for sure. Yes.
And for those in the US, Nox Novacula is going on tour. So check out the tour dates, see if there's any shows coming to a location near you.
Lucky bastards.
Yeah, I'm seeing them in April. So if any of my local Pittsburgh fellow Pittsburgh goths are watching, it's I think Saturday, April 23rd at the Rock Room. Nox Novacula is going to be there.
Yep, and they're going to be in Tampa on Monday, April 18th We are hosting them in Secret Shame at Hooch and Hive.
I like that venue name, Hooch and Hive.
Yeah, it's run by two bee-obsessed lesbians who used to be in the scene. They're great.
Very cool. It's kind of funny you say that because there used to be this like coffee shop that was kind of like a punk goth hotspot hangout in Pittsburgh called the Beehive.
I don't know. Maybe alternative people just like bees.
I have a tattoo of a bee. I have a tattoo of a bee on my wrist.
See? Point proven.
I'm just checking the chat to see if there were other questions. Malek, you had brought up the Palest Gray. I know that the Palest Gray is not an active band currently, but it was a music project that you two had worked on in recent years, or you two were 2/3 of. So do you want to mention the CD and Always Haunted?
We were an active band up until like last week.
Yeah. Well, when it started, it was sort of like that idea of putting something out there to see if people are gonna like it or not, you know, and merge all of the influences that we all have. So it started in 2019 where Azy and I were talking at a brunch, and we were like, should we start a music project? And then we started discussing what type of genre would it be and stuff like that, and we just went with our spirit out where to the inspiration took us, you know, basically, and that's it. And it has been a very nice experience, growing, understanding the type of sound that we wanted and all of that. And I guess
it turns out the hardest part was getting the guitar sound right, so it didn't sound metal.
Don't say that.
Well, because
I didn't want to mention that part.
Well, it's because it's like baking. It's like baking. Everything uses the same ingredients, but sometimes you get a loaf of bread. You know, if you put certain things in. Other times you get a cake. You put other things in. You might get a scone. Same ingredients. You just got to figure out what proportion to put them in.
Let us say we struggle a little bit to try to get the right sound, and
I'm not so good at baking either. So yeah.
And it was great. In the end, we really liked it. We enjoyed it. We played twice live before the release of the album, which is ironic, but it was really good, and we enjoyed it. I think all we have from the Palest Gray is amazing memories and good merch to get into.
I mean, I'd like to get rid of the merch. I don't want to keep it for forever. So we have some glow-in-the-dark T-shirts and shit up on our Bandcamp page along with our album. But Batcave Productions out of Poland is, even though we're not active anymore, Tomas, the guy who runs it, really wanted to release the album. So we got together and we're just like, are we cool with this? Yeah, we're cool with this. So he's going to be releasing like the physical on CD, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. So everyone, if you want that CD, keep an eye on Batcave Productions for it. And if you want to buy the
now.
Yeah, if you want the digital album or merch, go to the Palest Gray's Bandcamp and check it out.
If you want the digital album, if you just buy a T-shirt, it comes with the digital album.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Also, I think we're gonna throw pins and stickers there as well if you buy the shirt. So we're gonna take it all out. And as for music, I think everyone is gonna keep working on music. Ripley has 2 projects that she's working on right now, and Azy is a great musician for sure. It was an amazing pleasure to work with all these years, because believe it or not, we started in 2019, the whole thing, and you just couldn't get it out because we needed to sound right, you know. But anyway, I mean, even though we don't have a professional recording studio, because everything was DIY. So that's one of the things you need to understand when you listen to the album. You're listening to an album that is very DIY. We don't have a huge studio recording.
Yeah, but that's super Deathrock.
But it's exactly, it catches that idea of, you know, DIY and stuff, which is really fun. By the way, it was really really good to work. And yeah, I have a whole bunch of lyrics that I wrote for the second album of The Payless Gray, so I think I'm gonna be working on. So stay tuned.
Yeah, but with yeah, because you plan on doing more collaborative projects with other folks moving forward,
yes,
right?
Yes, yeah. I have a few friend of mine who wrote and said, "Hey, if you're not doing the Payless Gray, which is a shame, then I would like to work with you in some stuff." And I'm like, yeah. Okay, cool. Let's work together. I'm easy to work with, you know. Well, so they say.
You're not. You're very particular, but that's not a bad thing. Yeah. Because, you know, otherwise you just end up making something that sounds like whatever. But when you're very particular, like, about this is the weird thing we're gonna do, like that's really positive. And I always appreciated that about when we were working on the first album, is how particular you were, because that particularness like pushed me to try new things and learn or try to figure out techniques to do things that I hadn't previously considered, to try to meet that particular expectation. So not a bad thing at all. But that's kind of the cool thing about Deathrock, though, is because it's so DIY, you know, and because it follows that whole punk ethos of, you know, don't wait until you've learned to do something, just fucking do it. Learn along the way. I think it makes it way more accessible to people who just want to pick up and make something. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be polished. You don't have to know how to make music. But, you know, just humans are predisposed to making music. And I would absolutely love to see more people just, you know, putting that out there and pouring themselves into something that may ultimately end up being really shitty. But who cares? You know, make music.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think there are so many bands who've later become legendary who started out and didn't really know how to play instruments. So there is hope.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the punk bands started like that. They were like, "Oh, let's get together and play something," and they come up with very interesting things, you know, along the way. And I think that can happen to anyone if they want to, if they really want to make music, you know. One of the things that the Payless Gray always wanted to capture the genre sound, but at the same time be experimental. And I think that's one of the reasons we ended up being very influenced by Deathrock, or infused, like the Bandcamp says, is because Deathrock has the room for it. It has that opportunity that you want to make weird music or interesting music, as I call it.
Yeah. Yeah, that DIY spirit is integral to Deathrock.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't commodify Deathrock because it's so DIY. I mean, you can commodify punk, and that's pretty DIY.
I was about to say, don't Don't speak too soon. That's been said about just about every alternative like subculture or like underground music movement.
Oh yeah, no, that's just part of the parasitic cycle.
Mm.
Oh well.
Yeah.
Well, we've been chatting here for an hour and a half. I think we hit up the questions in the chat. Azy, any closing remarks for our viewers?
No, I already did my inspirational speech.
Yeah. So leaving it off on a high note. I like it. Malik, how about you? Any closing thoughts?
No, everything has been said. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Caroline, Dave.
This is actually our closing thought. You should rename the show to Kelly Springer.
Kelly Springer.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Put it up on YouTube like that.
So, Caroline, Dave, any closing thoughts or remarks?
No, this has been really great. You've been great guests. This was fun. So, yeah.
Yeah, this was a really good episode as we thought it would be. I've really been enjoying all the discussion and really hearing a lot of stuff that I haven't heard before. So, gonna be very interesting.
Yeah. Azy Malek, we love you. Thank you for coming on. You are both awesome guests to have for discussion, and especially about Deathrock, two of the most insightful people I know on the topic. So we really appreciate you coming on. For everyone watching this back on YouTube, I will link all kinds of stuff that we talked about here today and where you can find Azy Malek in the description. Thank you everyone for joining us.